Gavin, I want to add my voice to that of Neil's when he said this morning that you have been such a powerhouse in getting this event together, and I want to thank you. I love the idea of being the head of state. I have to tell you that I did a meeting a week ago, and I was introduced, and the person who introduced me said Helena Kennedy was only last year listed by one of the great Scottish newspapers as being amongst the top 10 great Scots, great living Scots. And he said, but I do have to tell you that since that time, a number of people have come off the list. Scottish cabinet ministers, Scottish bankers, and it's now down to her and Sean Connery. So, now I just wanted to say to all of you that, of course, my friend down here in the front who said he came here feeling depressed and he wanted to be uplifted. We're going to leave here uplifted, I promise you. I too have been depressed, but I never stay depressed for long, because I always end up going to meetings where I speak to the general public, I speak to people, and I end up feeling that actually they share the feelings that I have and want the changes that I want. And I do want us, it's very important that we do actually have some diagnosis before we go on to the change, when we say there's to be no turning back. And we're right to feel a sense of disappointment. And I say this to Chaka, whom I love dearly and admire enormously, and he's one of our hopes for the future. And of course he, as a person standing as a politician for the next election, of course he will defend the good things that Labour has done in the last 12 years. But we're right to feel levels of disappointment. I felt them when I went into the House of Lords, and there we were. We brought in the Human Rights Act, and yet it came into being, actually, into active being in 2000, and before the year was out, we had derogated from it because of 9/11 and had said that we were prepared to lock people up without trial. Well, you know, the shameful thing of not taking ownership of that wonderful piece of legislation that gave us a language for talking about how we would live together in our society as decent human beings, respecting each other, whatever our colour, our race, our creed. And instead of that, using that language to deal with the assaults on asylum seekers, to deal with the denigration of immigrants, instead of using that language to talk about the enrichment of our society because of the coming together of human beings and respect for each other, instead of that, we were so happy to undermine it. And we've had other great disappointments. I was in the House of Lords only the other night. There we were trying to deal with the Welfare Reform Act. The Welfare Reform Act, where we're taking a stick to people to force them to get jobs, having their benefits removed. And we're doing that at a time when, you know, hundreds of thousands of people are being rendered unemployed. And we are going to be saying that the people who have had the most assault on their ability to find jobs and so on, who often have great difficulties. For me, it's about dealing with women who have come from domestic violence situations, and we're going to force those mothers back into work and not give them real periods of grace before doing so, at a time when there is going to be high levels of unemployment. That we have seen in this period also, I think, an engagement, an embracing of awful language, which we heard from Ruth Lister, in talking about the fecklessness of people, in talking about scroungers, in talking about bogus asylum seekers. We, our party in Labour, had embraced some of that such deleterious language. That we expanded so many of the things that I think we should not have allowed to see expanding in terms of encroachments and so on onto the rights of people. The whole business of ID cards, what are we doing thinking of that? Well, why was Labour wanting to have super casinos? Why are we talking about super prisons and enormous prisons and incarcerating people in warehouses? Why should it be Labour that should be doing such a thing? And then we have this whole business of a recession where bankers were out of control, where a culture of greed and acquisition has become the dominant culture, when we look to government to be the central institution that holds other institutions to account. And the reason that people are feeling so angry is to find then that, in fact, parliamentarians were also, to their eyes, on the make. what is Labour for if it isn't about injecting a moral component into the market? And I do think that this, of course, we're going through a period of very serious crisis, but it does provide opportunities. I believe, as I know many of you do too, that markets have no place in some of our human relationships. I'm a lawyer, a human rights lawyer, working in the courts for the most marginalized of people, for the people who have the hardest time getting voice within our courts. And let me tell you, the idea of commodifying justice is something that should be anathema to all of us. And in many other areas where we are seeing this slow business of markets somehow contaminating the relationships that exist, whether it's in health or in education, it is not the way that we should be going, particularly we in Labour. I've listened to the arguments that are put by some of the people in government or those who were recently in government, like David Blunkett, about why there shouldn't be proportional representation. They say, first past the post gives you strong government. Well, let me just tell you, strong government gave us the Iraq War, strong government has given us privatizations we should never have had, and strong government has driven through attacks on our civil liberties that should never have taken place. And I do think that for those of you in this hall who share my belief as to what a Labour Party should be about, then I do think that we should feel a sense of depression, a sense of anger, that that gap to which Richard has spoken, that gap between rich and poor has grown, and that we have seen more and more of our children in poverty than we would have ever believed was possible under a Labour government. That is unacceptable for us after 12 years. Well, there are two kinds of debate for us to be having today. One is the debate about, for me anyway, saving my party and wanting my party to strengthen itself and to renew itself and not to go back, not to turn back to the economics which we've engaged in over this last period, to look at a new way of doing business. But there's also another issue, as well as that renewal for Labour issue, and that question of what is Labour for in this new world. But there's another debate which is about our democracy, which engages everybody, and that means an engagement of everybody, including people who would not consider themselves to be of the left or of Labour or of our tradition, but people across the country who are feeling so disillusioned with politics. When I went out with the Power Inquiry and we went to meetings up and down the country, and they were not meetings to which we had set up, where you get, you know, the enlightened and the already connected political people. We went to community centres and to schools and to colleges and went into other people's meetings, I'm afraid, gate-crashed them to say, we want to know why, whether you voted, if you did, how, and if you didn't, why, and are you a member of a political party, and if not, why not? And we talked about politics. And we found that people were very keen to talk about politics, and people care about the issues. But what people are very disengaged from is the political system that we have. So what do we do about that? And I believe very strongly that this moment that has been spoken about, this constitutional moment, is here, but it could so easily seep away. And if we get a Conservative government next year, it will have seeped away for a very, very long time. How do we seize this moment? Well, I happen to agree with some of the people on the last platform that I'm afraid it's not good enough for our Prime Minister, our Labour Prime Minister, to say we're going to do this constitutional thing and that constitutional thing at the 11th hour, not having done it before. Because it looks like opportunism in the face of what looks like defeat. And so when Gordon Brown